So we've got a great little set of panelists today, and we're going to go through and sort of chat with them and learn more about their experiences participating in work groups that the TSC put on to develop standards. So before I do that, before I introduce the panelists, I'm just going to go through a quick sort of background about the TSC, my role as chair for this agenda or this webinar, and then also my role in the TSC more generally and some of my experiences. So TSC itself was founded in Q1 of 2020 by the Bitcoin Association. Chairman is Steve Shatters, and there's 10 members that essentially founded the TSC, and they're from various companies throughout the industry, people that most of you probably know already. And they're from countries, different countries and different backgrounds, not only in terms of culturally and where they've grown up, but also technical and business people as well. So it's not just all technical people, it's people that have different sort of perspectives and ways of looking at the world. The main purpose is really to facilitate the cooperation of industry participants. So the nature of Bitcoin is such that interoperability is really, really important for everyone. But sometimes it can be really tough for companies to kind of bridge that gap and work with sometimes competitors or other kind of companies to really make something that works best for them. So having this organization with a very clear set of goals and very strict governance and procedures and policies, it gives companies a sort of a structure, a framework in which they can cooperate with each other really well. So that was the goals that we set out, and we've worked very hard to kind of deliver on that. And I would say personally, with my other hat on it, being a CEO of Tokenized, that I think it's been done really well so far. And our participation today in the first standard that we really got involved in, we were really sort of impressed with how everything worked, and we were impressed with the participation of other companies and sort of at the end of the day, the result of the standard. So for us, the purpose is clear, and our experiences have definitely given credit to that, us achieving that. So the main way this is sort of structured and broken up is that to get to a standard, as you saw there, there's a working group that's formed, and there's a process to decide whether a working group should be formed or should it not. And that really comes from industry need. So a company may submit a proposal saying that we need a standard for this particular problem or this aspect of our operations. The TSC goes through it all. They decide if it makes sense to be a standard, if it makes sense to put a work group together to kind of develop that standard, and then they facilitate the formation of that work group. So the people that you have here today are all people that are from, again, various backgrounds, but they have all participated in a work group, at least one, either as an author of a standard or a reviewer, which are sort of two different functions, but essentially they're just working together to kind of get these standards across the line. And so, yeah, I'll just introduce them and we'll go through one by one, and we'll sort of get to know them a little bit and get to know their experiences as a TSC work group participant and kind of trying to learn about it. So the first one we have here is Ben from Switzerland. So he's the general manager and chairman of the board at Genti. He participated in a number of standards already. He participated in the travel rule specification standard, which has to do with basically sharing information between VASP or financial service companies or wallets, so that AML and the like, those types of rules can be complied with. He's also participated in the SPV envelope specification standard, which is the one that Tokenized drove originally. And sorry, that's a different one. Sorry, SPV envelope's a different one that he went. That's not the one we were in. And then he's also participated in the invoice-based payment standard. So Ben, welcome. Thanks for joining. Would you mind introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your background, both professionally and also your personal interest in Bitcoin and your journey and what you're currently working on?
Sure. Thanks, James. Thanks for introducing me. Yeah, my name is Bernhard Müller, and I'm actually a biologist. Then I've worked for over 10 years in the medical diagnostic industry basically as an instrument and system designer, first as engineer, later as project lead, and then moved over to the sort of crypto financial industry in 2018. But I've been involved as a hobbyist for a long time, almost 10 years now. And in 2020, based on an idea we had in 2019, I founded, together with the co-founder Genti. So we're all about payments. We want to become the cash register of the 21st century. And so naturally, the topic of the travel rule interested me. I wanted to at least know what's going on there, you know, where the standard is developing into. I sort of joined mostly to just poke my nose in and know what's going on before it's published, and became somewhat active in at least making comments and you know, trying to actively contribute. And based on what I've seen in that group, I then you know, we already worked on certain extensions to what is called BIP 270. And while we actually implemented it in the company at first, we realized that what we found online, you know, wasn't really true. The information wasn't, I mean, it wasn't hugely different, but, you know, everybody made certain things a little bit different. And so I realized, okay, there is a need for standardization here, and there is also a need for extension. And that's what we want to do in the invoice-based payment group, where me and my CTO are basically the authors, and I've been absolutely amazed by the interest. So we had 22 applications for reviewers of this standard, and we'll have to hold 3 intro sessions in 3 different time zones to make sure that everyone that's interested, you know, hears from us, what are our goals, what do we want to achieve with it, and of course we want to also hear, you know, what other people want to achieve with it, because in the end it should work for everyone, not just for us. And so this is now getting started, quite exciting. And I think that's, especially payments, you know, our company is not interested in, you know, that only our app would work to pay, you know, with our merchants. We want everyone as much as possible to be able to pay, and that's why standardization here is very, very valuable. Otherwise, it's just another proprietary system, sort of thing. Yeah, if there are any questions about myself, about the business, or my participation in the groups, just let me know. What I can say maybe quickly about how it is to work in the work groups. What's really comfortable is actually this administrative service, which kind of, you know, pokes you, you should do something again. You know, they organize the meetings, find the time slots, and that's very, very valuable, that you as a participant can actually focus fully on the content and not on the whole organization around it. And I think that that's very, very valuable, so we don't lose a lot of time among sort of the experts with, you know, finding slots and doing all this administrative work. So that has been very, very good, and I like how it's going so far, and this is why I decided to also become an author of a standard.
Brilliant. Well, I share a lot of your thoughts and feelings there, especially with the importance of being interoperable. It really does distinguish this sort of whole frontier of technology that we're working on, and the user experience you can generate from it. So in terms of the actual developing the standard, can you just explain a little more about sort of the process that you guys went through? So you said you had a meeting, an intro meeting that you were sort of scheduling, and how does that kind of thing flow and work, and how did you find it?
Well, okay, I mean, so for invoice-based payments, we're just really at the start of the work group. But I can maybe say, you know, how we got there. And I've asked around in several forums or chats, and I said, hey, actually, this information about BIP 270 on GitHub doesn't seem entirely correct. And we have some ideas how to extend it, which are fully backwards compatible. So I was looking for some people, and I realized, yeah, nobody's responsible, right? Nobody owns this topic in that sense. And so I started talking first informally, I think, to some members of the committee, and they then recommended that I should make a formal request for a working group, which I did. And we basically entered there the problems we see and what we want to solve, and also the ideas for extensions we have. And of course, it should be an invite to everyone to add their own ideas as well. That's how we got there. And now the first 3 meetings will be held. Again, this will be the same meeting 3 times, because we have so much interest from so many time zones that basically this intro session will be held 3 times. And it's, I think, next week or the week after. And there we basically want to pre-select a little bit who is more like I was in the first working group. They just want to poke their nose in and see what's going on. Who wants to, you know, who has like requirements they want to bring in, who wants to actively participate, have a more active role, and who wants to just more know what's going on, because for like developing the standard, it will be very unhandy to work with 24 people in total. And so we'll try to make some sort of selection, not in a sense that anyone can't see what's going on or not participate, but also naturally, usually you have that some people want to be more actively involved and others want to be less actively involved. So I hope it just falls into place, but we will have to, you know, assess that and first find out and talk to everyone involved and see why they're involved, what their interests are. And then we can also maybe even shape the goals of the standards group. Maybe they will be a little bit extended, could be, depending on the requirements and expectations that people have. And then we'll go into the more concrete work from there.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point too, because our experience with the envelope specification, not the SPV one, but the original one that we did, was there. Some people just had a little bit to contribute, and it was important. They just made sure that it went in the right direction to sort of suit their things. And other people really wanted to get stuck in and really kind of contribute. And I think that's a message that everyone should take away from this webinar, is that we really don't have a strong opinion about the way that you want to contribute. It's more that we want to bring to people who are interested in the standard and want to contribute in some capacity. So, you know, you might not be the best technical guy, but you don't need to be intimidated by that if your business has an interest in it. So we keep things welcome like that. And it's glad that you saw the same way and had the same experience. So it sounds like you had a positive experience on the whole, generally, both what you've done to date and what you're starting to work with now in this next standard. I guess you'd recommend joining it then. This is something that's a positive experience for you.
Yes, if there is a topic where you're interested and where you think you can contribute, or where you need to stay up to date, you know, it could also be that you just want to stay up to date and don't want to only learn about it once it's published. So absolutely join the standards committee if you're interested in that topic. There is no point in just joining them for the sake of joining them, of course. Absolutely. So far the experience has been positive, and I think this is just started getting ramped up now. It's becoming much more widely known as well that the standards committee exists, and so this is also why this webinar was, I guess, initiated, so people can learn a little bit more. What are the experiences of people that have worked there? And for me, it was clearly that I just wanted to have kind of a little involvement in the beginning, and as it goes, sometimes you just get sucked in a little bit. And but I think it's time well invested. It's of course time that I'm not working on something concretely in my business during I do this work, but it will benefit us all, and it will also benefit my business if we have good standards, and standards which are understood by everyone.
Yeah, that's a fair point too. I thought it was kind of interesting being a work group, just hearing a particular standard, what other people are thinking about. It sort of inspires a bit of creativity and gets your creative juices, so to speak, going. Brilliant. Well, I really appreciate that, Ben. I think I'll move on to Degan. Degan, welcome.
Hello, thanks.
So Degan is the CTO of ELAS Digital at the moment, and some of you may know him as the founder of Baymail as well. That was an app that was still going these days, isn't it? But it was quite a hot thing for a while. And you're also the co-organizer of the London Bitcoin meetup, and you've participated so far in the Paymail standard, which is still ongoing, I believe, as a reviewer. And you're also participating in the invoice-based payment standard as a reviewer as well. So yeah, other than what I've just described, would you mind just sort of sharing a little bit about yourself and professional background perhaps, and your interest in Bitcoin?
Yeah, so it was really interesting to hear Ben's background is in biology. My background is predominantly career-wise in video production, actually. So again, like totally not necessarily related, but my sort of educational background is in electronics engineering, specifically audio and video stuff. So when I think of technical standards, it makes me think of like cables, and the nightmare that it is trying to get one video camera manufacturer's connection to plug into a laptop, to plug into a mixer or something like that, and all of the conundrums that not having standard connections causes or would have caused for those types of standards. So the IEEE is what comes to mind. So when I heard about the sort of technical standards committee within the Bitcoin context, immediately made me think, oh, well, we essentially have the same problems, but in software, right? We want to work with each other. We also want to gain strategic advantage if we're sort of competitors. So I know. So one of the things we're to consider is why might I encourage somebody to join the Technical Standards Committee? And I wouldn't. If you're going to be a competitor, you can leave. Thanks very much. I'd much rather be in a group of people who are not necessarily competing directly with me, but of course, people will act on their own self-interest. So it's really good to speak with people who are experts in those sort of different fields, right? Some very technical people, some really good IT security people, some people who are maybe have some more idea of the legal side of things than me. Certainly, I come from that purely sort of full stack app development background where I'm just kind of a tinkerer. So I like building things fast and first. And that's put me in a position where things like Baymail have this sort of Baymail standard, right? But I just made it up. And I remember at the time being really reluctant to proceed, thinking like, well, damn, I'm trying to make something here that's compatible with other people. Those other people don't exist yet. So do I just make it up? And I ended up just talking with a few peers. And that really helped in developing what that then became. And that was obviously years before the Technical Standards Committee existed. And it would have been a lot easier if we could have had one of these things for messaging. And I'm sure we will have peer-to-peer messaging discussions. If it's not sponsored already, that's something that obviously is going to happen, I would imagine. And, sponsor it myself if I have to. So yeah, it's been really reassuring so far to really just validate sort of concepts that we have about, well, building our own products, extending Paymail as a standard, and trying to make sure that we're not redesigning things that already exist. Obviously, there are people out there with way more sort of decades behind them in technical specific roles that can guide the group on really like minute details of how we should proceed because of their experience. And that's, amazingly helpful. And like you said, being involved with other people's with more experience and different backgrounds as we develop our own software, we're having this sort of inside line with what's going to become a standard. That's like strategically advantageous, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point there too. I agree 100%. So I've, paid a lot of interest to the work groups and discussions going on because they're really interesting and people are really thinking, and it does attract very talented people. And kind of what you were saying too there, what I thought was really interesting, even really technically capable people, when they come together, they all have very subtle strengths and weaknesses that kind of blend together in a beautiful way. So it's really nice to see some of the comments and the way the thing formed.
Definitely. The one disadvantage is speed, right? So if you're coming up with a technical standard that's supposed to have some sort of longevity, it does take a long time, and that can be frustrating for someone like me who's used to being like, let's just make a decision today and build it tomorrow kind of thing. So there's pros and cons, right? It's not perfect, but certainly I'd echo Ben's sentiments in terms of, like, it's better to have this organization that takes all of the decisions about, are we going to use Word docs? Are we going to use Google Docs? Are we going to use Slack or Notion? Or, all that's aside, and all we talk about is the technical standard in question. That's really helpful.
Yeah, and there is a lot of details, isn't there, really, at the end of the day, organizing things like this. So yeah, it is a thing. Great. So how did you find the whole process then in general? Like, did you find it easy to understand, easy to integrate with? Was everything like
super boring, to be honest? Like, technical standards are very, very boring conversations to some degree. But that a lot of that faff is just getting people in the door. And once you actually have the discussions with everyone, that's really interesting to me. Talking about those finer details and being able to make those decisions, I guess is not just interesting, but it feels meaningful, because that because the process is a little convoluted in terms of not convoluted, it's simple, but just very paced, right? So you're making really slow, careful decisions. And then you arrive at this standard, and it's meaningful that might last for decades. Think of like the internet protocol, how long that's lasted, and all sorts of things that we use like email today. So you can have your little input could change the direction of of technical history. That's really important for someone who's come through an engineering degree that feels like they want to make a contribution to society.
Yeah, it feels like the big leagues, doesn't it? For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome.
delusions of grandeur are realized in the technical standards committee.
Brilliant. So it sounds like you're positive on it. You definitely recommend it. Any final comments for any people interested in maybe participating?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'd just like to reiterate that if you're my competition, then I do not want you to participate. You can go elsewhere. Thanks very much. But if you have expertise in sort of legal field or some IT security stuff, then please join, because that would fill a gap I don't have.
Great. Thanks, Dagan. Appreciate it, mate.
Cheers.
Next, we got Delphine Forma. So she's the Chief Compliance and Risk Officer at TAL, and formerly an Open Vast Association board member, specializing really on the compliance side, travel rule compliance protocol, which is kind of rolled into a work group as we were talking about before. And it continues to be a reviewer in the work group for the travel specification. So Delphine, welcome. Would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and introducing yourself and telling us about your Bitcoin journey?
Sure. Hi, James. Thank you for having me today. So I'm still a board member of the Open VASP Association, just to correct that.
My fault.
Yes, so my background is in legal mostly and compliance, working for a financial institution in London as well as in Tokyo, a little bit in France too. And I've been in Switzerland for 4 years working for a crypto exchange for 3 years as a head of compliance. And that was since 2017. So as you may imagine, at that time, it was kind of like a wild race. It was the ICO boom. It was like super interesting. There was events all over the place, so many different projects. And as the head of compliance of an exchange, it was like a great learning curve and a very, very good experience. Because I was responsible for making sure that we were not listing any scams, that it was not a security, that we were allowed to list what we were listing. So I had to read tons and tons of white paper and actually learn a lot about the technology and the different, and all like blockchain will change the way we are interacting also, super interesting. And I've been with TAL now for 1 year. So TAL, we are a publicly listed company in Canada. We have offices in Canada and in Switzerland. We do crypto mining and transaction processing, and some very cool stuff are gonna come up soon. So please attend the ConGeek conference and you will learn more about that.
Beautiful, thanks for that. So this is an interesting one, the travel rule specification, because it's really sort of blending the compliance and business processes and really at a global scale with the technology and really bringing it together. Yeah. So how have you found so far the process itself and sort of the tooling and the experience of participating and communicating with the rest of the work group?
So I think it was very well organized and it runs very smoothly. I had experience with this kind of working before because when we started the Open VASP Association back in 2019, we also had like a committee where it was a little bit different because we had a committee with compliance and legal, committee with tech, and then like a few months after we merged both committee. And I think it's a very good approach, especially for the travel rule, right? And the way it is done here is you really need to have compliance and legal working together with tech people. And I think the way it has been organized is great because, as Bernard mentioned before, we don't have too much to do. You know, we have actually a Telegram channel, which is really, really useful. You know, if we need anything, I need to exchange some information that we need to act upon, or even to organize a meeting, that's really good. And as an expert, we just have to show up, and it's great to be able to share knowledge and experience. I think this is something which is really key for industry. Like, I think this is where the industry has a great added value compared, for instance, if you compare it to our works financial institution, crypto and blockchain, we need to work together. We actually have to work together in order to be able to strive as an industry and to reach mass adoption. It's very critical that we work together. And for travel rule compliance, as travel rule, basically what what it means is like you need to enable communication between virtual asset service provider, between themselves, also with other obliged entities such as banks or any entity that allows the transfer of crypto assets. And building a standard, you need to build a standard that can be used by everyone or is interoperable with other standards. So it needs to work with what is on the market, and that's very important. It's like basically it's like building a Swift messages for crypto, because you need to exchange information between the originator and the beneficiary, and the system has to communicate together if there is another one on the market. Like for instance, like right now, main standard for travel rule compliance, you will have Signa, TRISA, BSV First Trace, and OpenVASP. And we are now looking at a new standard, but when we were looking at the standard, we also look at those existing protocols and how to leverage what has been done before. And I think it's critical that everything, if there is not one winner, that everything can communicate together. And this is why it's good to have like a good mix of people attending this working group.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, it's been actually like very insightful to sort of see the different skill sets in that group. Actually, it's been very interesting to see how the comments go and sort of the input that's being made. And I know a lot of blockchain developers are probably very appreciative of the standard coming into play and a lot of those hard, messy technical or compliance questions being answered for them. Again, making it a lot clearer for them. So that's great. So it sounds like you've had a positive experience so far. It sounds like you like the tooling and the way that you guys are communicating through Telegram and the like. Is it sort of any parts of it that haven't been the way you thought it was, or that you sort of a takeaway from the experience that you really appreciated, that, you know, a subtle thing that maybe someone who hasn't been a part of it will appreciate?
I would say that it just goes quickness to my to my personal will, right? Sometimes I just would like that we move faster, but I mean, it's a big topic, so there's a lot of exchange to be done, and we are all busy. I think, like, you know, when you're part of this working group, and from my past experience, we are all doing that as volunteers, so it takes a little bit more time that, you know, if it's more like business oriented. But, you know, this is the way it works. And yeah, I really, we actually have another meeting on Monday, finally, which I think is really good. But it's also important that we get it right and that we have the good people involved. So I think, like, for future working group, it's important that different people from different backgrounds are involved. So, you know, working group, we have business, we have compliance and legal, and we have tech. And I think it's really important when you build up standards that you have like all these different backgrounds present in the working group in order to build something that is really useful or will be used by the industry. You really need to have industry players with different backgrounds, because we all know different problematics. So, like, I will more have ideas about like what is going to be the next problem from a legal and compliance point of view. Then someone else will say, oh, but from a tech point of view, there is this, and then we can talk together, right? So I think it's important you have all those functions present in a working group.
Yeah, fair enough. And one thing that I've noticed too, sort of the pace of it was, you know, not ideal for me in a lot of ways, but I've also noticed sort of some of the reasons and how things are coming together. And I actually do see the pace starting to pick up a little bit. So a lot of the kinks have been ironed out and things like that. So I think we're moving in the right direction there, but fair enough. Any final comments about your experience? Would you recommend it?
Yes, I would. I think it's a very good experience for anyone to join working, just, you know, for the exchange of idea and for the experience of the user member. You can learn a lot. And like, if you're passionate about crypto and blockchain, like, it's such a great way to be able to make an impact and to help others with sharing your knowledge. I think it's super important. And I absolutely love doing that. I think it's just like great to be able to share with others your knowledge and contribute to the ecosystem. It's just like an amazing experience.
Yeah, it's a great insight, isn't it? Like, you don't get this perspective from social media, like seeing the actual companies working so closely together. You get a real insight into some really interesting details. Absolutely. Well, really appreciate you coming on, and thanks for your insight.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to the next one. Before we move on to the next one, I'll just kind of remind the audience that if you guys have any questions, feel free to just pop them in the chat, and it can be to any of the panelists as they've come up, or what any general questions you have, and we'll get to them at the end. And also, if I see a question that makes sense during the conversation, I'll just put it straight up to the panelists that's actually happening. So, all right, so the next one we got is Dylan Murray. So he's a co-founder and CTO of Bright Review. And he's also participated in the envelope specification standard. So this actually is the one that Tokenize worked with as well. So I remember working quite closely with Dylan on this one. Dylan, would you mind introducing yourself, sharing a little bit about your professional background and your interest in journey in Bitcoin?
Yeah, so my name's Dylan Murray. My professional background, I've been a computer engineer for 7, 8 years now. I have a pretty extensive background in the open source cloud native world. So I think what drew me the most to the TSC was, in other enterprise environments, this type of process is pretty familiar to me. So we weren't necessarily interested at Brightview from the beginning of developing our own protocol. We really wanted to work with other folks to get our ideas vetted and find any standards that other companies in the space were using. So with Bitcoin, me and my brother have been playing around with this for years now. Brightview was a result of a hackathon contest. We ended up being a runner-up in, and since then we've developed our own data protocol for how we're storing data on the chain before the envelope spec actually came out. And what kind of motivated us to join the TSC for the envelope spec was, we kind of realized that every single problem we were facing and every question we had in terms of, why were we storing data the way that we were, everyone else in the space was having the same type of questions, but no one was really communicating a path forward for standardizing it. So once we saw the envelope spec, we were drawn to it pretty immediately. And the other thing that really drew us to it was we use the MetaNet protocol for storing data on chain. And the original proposal for the envelope spec actually included basically a standardized way of including the MetaNet as a sub protocol for the envelope spec. So that definitely drew us to it. As the spec got revised over and over again, for good reason, the MetaNet aspect became like a sub protocol that would be agnostic to the overall envelope spec, but it was super useful for us to kind of chat that through and with other people that were also interested in solving that problem. And we got a lot of good insight from doing that.
Brilliant. Thanks. I sort of share some of your feelings on that one. And I kind of, one of the key points you made there was that I think kind of goes back to what, and opposes what Dagan was saying is, you don't want competitors here and getting an advantage on top of you, but at the same time, reinventing the wheel or going down the wrong path that doesn't end up becoming the standard can be really consequential for your company as well, right? So it is, there's a delicate balance to be had there. And typically, if you're on the same page as the rest of the industry, it's to your company's benefit. At least that's how I see it myself.
Yeah, it's kind of, I see a lot of parallels with how enterprise open source software gets developed, right? There is this, your competitors were the people that you're working with, but there's like this mutual interest in, if you can develop a good standard that you're both working off of, it actually makes your life easier in the long run, and it saves development time. So, everyone that we worked with, while you could, I guess, classify them as a competitor, we're kind of mutual beneficiaries of the fact that we're kind of discussing the same problem space. We're not going off in two different directions. And then, in 5 years from now, when we're all talking about reading data from the chain and like everyone has 10 different protocols, like that would be more of a disaster than if we just worked from the beginning. So, I see a lot of like parallels to how this kind of worked in the traditional enterprise environment, and Bitcoin's finally finding like a good way to kind of professionalize. So I think also Darren brought up the point, like one of the biggest benefits that I found from joining the TSC was the types of questions that people had reviewing the spec. I never really would have thought of myself. And they're kind of all coming at it from a different, hey, how does this impact my company? What are the use cases that I have? And that triggers a whole different thought process than it did for me coming at it from like the whole MetaNet angle. So even small things like how we currently store data on chain, because we released before the envelope spec was kind of in the review process, it kind of challenged a lot of assumptions that I'd made in our first iteration of developing BrightView. And it's stuff that I never really would have thought about had I not joined the TSC. So it definitely helped me in ways that I didn't envision when I first started. So very beneficial to me.
Yeah, great. When we the proposal that we submitted for envelope obviously changed a lot, so obviously we went through the same process. A lot of our assumptions were challenged and for the better, for sure. Brilliant. So how did you find generally the process? What did it feel like to be part of the work group, and what did it feel like to communicate with everyone? And I think we use Confluence typically. Was that something that was valuable to you? Do you appreciate how that all went down?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit of a challenge. You got everyone across the globe. So at first I was a little bit concerned that it was going to be too bureaucratic, I guess. Every week if you have to meet and try to coordinate everyone on a global time scale, that gets challenging. But it was actually very, very simple. It was kind of like an asynchronous review process. So I never used Confluence before, but I found it incredibly easy to use, almost far easier than like existing tools like Google Docs or anything like that. I really enjoyed the fact that it had like a really solid versioning history. So as other folks left comments and things got updated, it was very easy to kind of, let's say that happened in the span of a week while I didn't have a chance to review it. It's very easy to kind of follow the change log, if you will, over how the spec changed. So I found that very, very useful. And as far as like a time commitment, it can feel like a lot of work sometimes, but you're also reading like a technical document that's giving you a lot of insight that's more than just reviewing the spec, if you will, right? Like you're kind of also getting a lot of educational knowledge. It's kind of like reading any other technical document. You're gaining a lot of info as you go through the process of saying like, hey, challenging assumptions, is this actually correct? Is this going to work properly? So it started to feel less like work as it was teaching me more than I was actually reviewing things. So yeah, I found the process very, very easy to deal with. For being coordinated across multiple countries and time zones, I found the process to be very, very tightly knit, better than I've seen in other worlds, I guess. So yeah, I was impressed.
Great. Well, yeah, I think it's definitely a testament to some of the people behind the scenes at TSC making that run smoothly. There's a lot of details they do a good job of, I think. Great. So in general, it sounds like you had a positive experience. Are you thinking about working on another or joining another work group in the future? Would you recommend it to other people?
Yeah, I would absolutely recommend it to really anyone that's working in the Bitcoin space right now. Search the open proposals. If it's remotely relevant to your industry, at the minimum, you should be following it because, as we've said multiple times already, like I think the biggest benefit to someone that could say like, hey, maybe I don't have a lot to contribute in terms of the review process itself. You'll gain a lot of knowledge and insight that you wouldn't get not going through the process. So I think, James, you made a great point. Like it shouldn't be, you shouldn't be thinking about it like, oh, do I have the technical chops to actually like, change the way that the spec is being developed? It should be more of like, well, this is relevant to my industry. This is relevant to my business. I want to make sure that I'm getting as much knowledge and insight into how this affects my company. So yeah, I would highly recommend it to anyone, not just technical people. If you have something that you feel like you can contribute, it's well worth your time, in my opinion.
That's a really interesting point there too, because I actually just got a question from one of the attendees saying, was being part of a working group a good way to make new connections? And I think in part you answered that. You're interacting with people that you wouldn't necessarily interact with. Could you maybe speak to that a bit more?
Yeah, not only was I interacting with people I don't interact with before, there's a lot of folks in the space, like I've chatted with other companies that, this whole problem of how do you have interoperable data on chain, like that's been a conversation I've had for almost 2 or 3 years with different people in the Bitcoin space. So there's a lot of people that I'd already kind of talked this problem with that had joined the working group, and we're trying to figure out like, hey, is this envelope thing the standard? Because there's been a bunch of other open source standards that were trying to get traction and they never really got picked up. So it was kind of like rekindling old connections for me. There's a lot of people that I talked to at previous conferences that I saw in the working group, and we kind of started the conversation again to say like, hey, look, I remember we talked about this a year and a half ago. What are you guys doing today? Here's what we're doing today. It's like co-opetition, you know, like, yes, you're our competitor, but it's just life gets so much easier if you can kind of bounce ideas off with other people that are solving the same problems as you. So yeah, I would say new connections definitely, but for me personally, like a lot of people I met before that I kind of lost contact with, and when we both kind of realized, hey, we're solving the same problem again, like maybe we should hop on a call and chat again. So yeah, absolutely, it's a great networking thing for me.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I feel the same way. So I've had definitely some of the strongest connections, aside obviously from people I worked with closely in the company through this. So yeah, I definitely echo that sentiment. Brilliant, Dylan. Really appreciate that. Thanks for your insights.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll go to the next one, Miguel. So Miguel is currently a developer at Run and was formerly a developer at Money Button and Fabric. He has participated in the ongoing Paymail Standard Working Group as an author, and he's also participating in the SPV Envelope Specification Standard as a reviewer, which is just starting, I believe. So welcome, Miguel. Would you mind introducing yourself, sharing a little bit about your professional background and your journey into Bitcoin?
Totally. Thanks. Well, I'm basically a software developer, and I've been doing that for a long time now. And I started into Bitcoin like in 2000. I really was 18 or 17 when there was like the big spike in price. At that moment, BSV didn't exist yet. It was always BTC. And I was interested in Bitcoin before, but because of the spike in price, everyone in my office at the moment started talking about that. And I had read a few papers, so at that moment I started to read more. And eventually I just put some money there just to understand, like to force me to understand how it worked on the inside. And eventually I got like an opportunity to work with in Money Button with Ryan X. Charles, and I just went ahead. Especially because I was interested in it. I had already spent time learning, and it was like, let's go deeper and see what we found. And then I spent several years working in Money Button. Money Button, during a big part of my time in Money Button, I've been the only developer, or at least the only full-time developer, because the CEO was also a coder, but basically I was doing all of the maintaining and all of the code from the front end to deployment. That was like an experience of going like really like looking at different aspects of Bitcoin, because it's not only for sure making it work or having like creating APIs that people can use or putting the data in certain way. It's also doing stuff like finding that the words that you are using are actually not the right ones for final users to understand what is going on, which we had other people helping that, but still it was like part of the same, right? Like part of the entire thing. And something that happened a lot is that, okay, eventually you have this cool feature, but it only makes sense if it's used outside Money Button, right? Like if we are, we do this, and okay, it will be really cool, and it enables a ton of stuff, but it only makes sense if people from the apps implementing Money Button or the other wallets actually do something. So we were like from the day zero, we had the need for standardization. And then eventually I started like Money Button was acquired by Fabric, and Fabric being like Money Button was a super wide company in the sense that the idea was making a really useful, like a tool that could be used in a ton of different things. And Fabric was more focused like in the economic and financial system. So it was like a kind of change on the way of thinking the problems. But still is what it like the same thing appearing a lot of times. I mean, standardize a ton of things, not only like that how to put the data in a way that is useful for everyone, even how to communicate stuff to know that we are talking about the same thing is something that in Bitcoin is always not so easy to accomplish because it's so new, right? So that and well, eventually in the last 3 or 4 months, I started working in Run, and Run is again going back to the more broad usage thing. Like the idea is like having general purpose token protocol. And even when we have, of course, our own stuff, again, it's the same thing. If you want to do something super broad and super general, you want that thing to be easy to implement everywhere. And in order, usually what you do to have something easy to implement everywhere is built on top of standards. So like, if you need all the time, it's like, it would be amazing if this would be a standard way for doing this. And we know that if we build on top of that, everyone is going to be able to use it.
Yeah, brilliant. What a group of companies to work for, and people to work with. Just incredible. And I agree 100%. It's kind of like one interesting thing about Bitcoin companies that sort of separates itself from sort of every other software project is that at the heart of it, you're always thinking about how is this going to, extend beyond my system alone, right? How does this become interoperable? How does it take advantage of the purpose of this distributed ledger that we have? So brilliant there. We got a question here that I thought might be perfect for you to answer from one of our attendees. Basically just kind of getting a sense of like, how much time did you spend each week in the working group? How much work do you do outside of them? What was sort of the commitment that you've seen, if you feel like you've had enough experience in the payment to say?
Well, payment had like two moments. Like payment started as like before the standard committee even existed. It started as a workshop, and it happened that the same idea like appeared in different minds of different people of different companies, basically. And it was like, okay, this looks like a good idea if all these smart people is saying I arrived to really similar conclusions. So we made the first spec. In that spec, my main role there was that I did the first implementation, which I really there's still people using it. It wasn't a perfect implementation because what a perfect implementation meant for my button, but still it was as general as we could. And for that first moment, and this wasn't exactly the Bitcoin Standard Committee, but it was a process of creating something that was going to become a standard. And that took some time, but because during the first implementation, what happened is that I started finding the issues on the spec, right? Like, look at this, like, I don't know, could be a lot simpler if we change it for this, or I noticed that whatever other tool you're using doesn't support this other thing. So that was like a spike in time consumption, but that like made sense. Like, it was strategic for my company at the moment doing that, and we like decided to spend the time working on the first implementation and improving the spec. So, but then you have moments where, I don't know, you're waiting for reviews, then you don't have to put so much time on it. And also it changes if you're a reviewer and if you are an author, and it changes about that how much interest you. I believe that the groups are like broad, and I believe that everyone understands that not everyone is going to put the same amount of time. And if you are in more than one group, there is one that is super strategic for you, and where you believe that your skill set is actually useful, so it makes sense that you put more time. And there are another ones where your role there is just, I don't know, you are really good for certain part of the process. So it's not that you have to put that at the time. So trying to do a more concrete answer. I believe there are spikes, when you need a little bit more time. But in general, it's not that you need to be full-time working in a working group, or you have to dedicate a lot of time. Because most of the work that is most of the work that is not doing exactly what you want to do, that is reviewing or writing spec, is done by the magic engine around the Bitcoin Standard Committee. There is someone looking for arrange the meetings at the right time. There is someone looking for the right tool for share the specs or for share the code. So literally, it's like you can focus. And I believe that there is room for looking what is the right time that you can put in the standard committee and working with the group to make that amount of time work, basically.
Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, I guess to add just some more color from our experience, I know Curtis was quite active in the standard that he did. He's one of our teammates in Tokenize, and I think he was putting in about a couple hours a week, sort of like a cadence for on the order of 3-4 weeks, let's say. But he was an author. And prior to that, he had put quite a bit of time in to understand the problem, obviously, and doing that kind of thing. So yeah, it does depend on if you're a reviewer or if an author and how close you are to it. And also just the complexity of standards. Some are quite simple, the standards, relatively speaking. Others are a lot more involved and multidisciplinary.
I am. It depends on what. There are things that are more time consuming, like that if you want to do the first implementation of something, it's probably going to take time. But probably if you decide to do the first implementation of something, it's because you have some interest. So that is not going to be time that you say, oh, how much now? You're going to be like, how lucky I am that I can do actually this. That is going to be super helpful for my business and for my company and for the ecosystem. So like that you say, a few hours a week, I believe that is accurate. And I believe that you can like be flexible and speak with the team to something that works. And if there is a moment when there is a spike of time consumption, it's probably because you are interested in actually doing that.
And likely going to be work that you would have to do anyways, right? Because it's solving problems that you want to solve, and in all practical, it's going to save you a lot of time, I think.
Totally, and it's like for you and for your company and probably for the ecosystem, right? So it's like those moments where you usually you have enthusiasm or in those moments.
Yeah, so I mean, I've seen that in spades. Everyone is super passionate about it, and the discussion's been super lively and thoughtful, which is always just a pleasure to be around, isn't it? Especially when you're interested in it as well. I got another question from the attendees. So what are some of the activities of the working group? Is it mainly discussion, or are there other things we can do? Do you mind responding to that? At least how's your experience has gone?
So that I can talk from my experience. There is definitely like conversation, talking, discussion that is important. And they should mention the fact that there is like a ton of like, well, actually several mentioned, but like you can go with a topic that because there you have like so many different expertise, like it transforms into something else, right? Because there are people that have totally different skills than you. So there is a part for sure of talking, there is a ton of learning, like literally the idea is doing standards that work for the entire ecosystem. And the entire ecosystem is kind of translates of the humanity, right? So there is a ton of things to do there. So it's talking, learning, exposing your ideas and your skills, and review documents. For sure, all the like most of the work that is not specifically creating the standard is done by the standard committee and the amazing people that do all of that. So the most thing, like whatever you do is usually something that is useful for developing the standard. And I'm putting, because I'm more technical and because usually that's my role. The other thing that I can imagine is doing implementations. That is another thing that is super, like for a ton of standards, having one example implementation is something that facilitates a ton the adoption later. Writing ways to test other implementations, finding useful information like previous attempts or how that problem that the standard solved was solved in another place, like research, writing ways to use the standard in the correct way, like whatever facilitates the adoption is also kind of part of doing the standard, because the standard in the vacuum is probably not going to be used, and if it's not used, it's actually not a standard, right? So those, I believe, is another part of the work that is super important.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that there too. And I know from the TSC's perspective, a lot of thought was put into sort of how you structure all that and how do you make it really usable and extensible and official for a long, long time. So it's good to see that you sort of saw the value there. Great. So it sounds like you had a positive experience and you obviously joined another one. So you recommend it then to all of our attendees?
There is actually something that I want to go with a different opinion that we heard before, like this idea of I will not encourage like my competitors to enter, and I'm like 100% feel different about that. Like one really cool thing that I developed and when I was working in Button was working with Handcash, and Handcash it was kind of like we had a really similar market or space, right? Like it was a wallet SDK for apps, both with the tiny differences, but in really similar purpose. And working with them was an amazing experience. I believe that what we got was super useful. And there is this thing, like sometimes I believe that we think everything as in Spanish, the word is un zero game. I don't know if that expression exists in English, but basically like a basketball game, right? In a basketball game, you need to like have more points than the other team. And there is basically two ways to do that. And you have to do both. That is score points and stop the other team for scoring points. But the business is not exactly like that. Like if you have currently 1% of the market, there is two ways to increase your amount of like revenue. You can get more amount of the market, like go to 3, 4, or 5%, or you can increase the size of the market. Right? If the market is 1,000 people, then you have 10 clients. But if the market suddenly is 10 million people, then you have a ton of clients, right? By having the 1%. And I feel that doing this kind of thing, especially in the moment where the Bitcoin is, actually helps to increase a lot the size of the market. Like you can actually collaborating with your competitors or with whoever. We can get to the moment where both grow more than they would have grown if they would have done the thing by themselves alone, right? So I believe that collaboration, like I believe in collaboration, and especially in the moment where Bitcoin is, where like we have, like Bitcoin is full potential. If it's full potential, that means that we need to apply that, transform that potential into reality. And the way to accomplish that, I believe, is by collaboration and by having, like, at the end of the day, what I want is Bitcoin to serve to humanity. And for sure, probably that involves doing good businesses and producing shows and doing a ton of stuff. But I feel that in the standard community is one of the places where we can see like the bigger picture and go into that thing of how we can actually make the Bitcoin ecosystem better. That for sure is going to benefit me and my company. But also it's like much more than that. And the way that it's going to benefit my company is by benefiting the entire ecosystem. So
yeah, really, really good point, I think, because especially essentially BSV is such a low-level protocol that network effects are so critical to all the business on top of it. And if you're all working together, you can build those network effects in a more productive multiplication type way. So I think it's a really insightful point there. Brilliant. Well, I think unfortunately we've run out of time, and I think we've answered all of the attendees' questions so far. But Miguel, I really appreciate your sharing your experiences and insights there. And thanks to everyone else, to all the panelists for your insights and experiences as well. And thanks to the attendees for attending. It's been a pleasure.